Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we are going to do a community Q&A session. A few weeks ago I asked you guys to ask me some questions on the community page and I would make a video answering those questions. So here we go. I'm going to try to get through them pretty quickly for each question because there's 25 of them, and I did a previous take of this that ended up being 40 minutes, and I don't think you guys want to watch a video that's that long. So let's go. All right. First question, Ryan Cox, what's the first hi-fi setup you ever had? He didn't say ever had. What's your first hi-fi setup? So I'm going to just take out of the category like the setups I had as a kid, because those were mostly like computer speakers, shit I found in the trash, or like cheap headphones gifted to me by family members. My first, what I would consider hi-fi setup would be the Emotiva A100 amp. Their XRT 4.1 speakers they had at the time. They were intended to be like satellite speakers, but it's all I could afford. They were like 169 bucks, I think. The amp was like 219. The source was my iPhone playing iTunes, so I was using like a $40 mono price Bluetooth adapter, and I had a Velodyne DPS 10-inch subwoofer that one of my friends was throwing away because it was pretty beat up, and I was like, hey, don't throw that away, I'll take it. And that was my first setup. I did later replace those speakers with the PSB Imagine Minis, and I rocked those for about 2 years before the bug bit me and I kind of went crazy and bought a whole bunch of other gear. Robert M, any thoughts on reviewing the Cord Q-Test DAC? I highly recommend it. Thank you for your recommendation, Robert. Probably not though. The whole point of this channel is for me to kind of like share my experience with my hi-fi journey. So right now, I'm really curious about subwoofers. That's why you're seeing a lot of subwoofer videos. I'm not tremendously curious about DACs right now. I'm a little bit curious, but like a couple $100 curious, not a couple $1,000 curious. So I did order the Shit Modius, and I have one here, and I will be reviewing it soon, but I'm not interested enough to spend big money on a DAC. I will probably try the Dina Frips Aries also later, just because it's so hyped up. And I've heard it is very good, but nothing like over $1,000, honestly. Rudy Beretta asks, any chance of taking the vinyl turntable route? No, definitely not, never. I cannot do physical media. I am old enough to remember the days of like physical CDs and things like that. I mean, when I was in high school, if you were sitting shotgun in someone's car, your job was DJ. You flipped through those huge like CD binders that were like 4 per page, and like they were like this thick, and like you had maybe like 200-300 CDs in those things. And God forbid if someone broke in your car and stole them. Definitely happened to me. I was heartbroken. Just thousands of dollars in physical media lost. I do know vinyl can sound amazing when set up right. I did have a gentleman A and B for me the difference between streaming and playing a really nice record. Granted, he was using something like a $30,000 record player, and I don't know how much his like cartridge and the rest of the associated equipment was. I think the system sat around $100,000, and on that system, the difference between streaming and records was amazing, but I can't handle the physical media. I won't do it. Paul Hyun asks, expensive exotic cables or power cables make a difference in the user listening experience in your opinion? In my opinion, yeah, I bought 5 power cables and I upgraded all my power cables at the same time. I used the Maze Audio Ref 4, and I did notice a little bit more air and openness in the top end. Honestly, I bought them just because I thought they looked cool, and any like perceived benefit to the overall sound was just like a bonus, honestly. I'm not gonna like A and B them to see if it was like psychological or if it really was a difference or not, because like just A and Bing like 5 power cables just doesn't sound like something I wanna do. I like the way they look, that's why I bought them, but I did notice an increase in air and separation. Let's see here. Stellar Odyssey asks, have you noticed a difference in sound quality between Tidal Hi-Fi and Qobuz? I have not compared the two before I started using Tidal. I did read a lot of reviews where people generally seem to think Tidal was better. Tidal supposedly has more of a wide offering, and I believe more of the money goes to the artist when you use Tidal, and those are the reasons I use Tidal. Robert M, do you recommend the Kinky Studio Power Amp? What are you most impressed with by it? I can only answer this question with the preamp as well, because that's how I use it. And I think that's actually what you're asking, the Kinky like stack with the preamp and monoblocks. Yes, I recommend it if that's your budget. I think it's about $6,000 for the stack. I love it. What I love most about it is low volume listening. Most cheaper amps Even like the Iota VX SA3, which is like highly regarded and loved, or the Emotiva TA100, and honestly, anything I've heard under 1,500 bucks. At low volume, it's a little closed off sounding, and then you get to this point around like 80 plus dB where it like really opens up, you get a ton of air and a little bit more detail, and the presentation just comes alive in terms of scale. With the Kinky Studio setup, at low volume, it still sounds tremendous. It sounds amazing. It still sounds big and full and lively, and like it just sounds amazing at low volumes, and I am a low volume listener, so I love that. What is the next question? Leroy Garcia. So how many completed audio rigs do you own, and what's the final count going to be? Do you have a dedicated HT system, or do you do double duty? I have a total of 4 sound systems, one down here, and this does double duty for home theater as well. In a like 2.1 or 2.2 setup is what I use. Upstairs in the living room, I use the Emotiva TA100 paired with the Monitor Audio Bronze 100s, yeah. And that's for like just TV, Netflix, whatever. The TV I have here is a little bit nicer than the one I have upstairs. This is the Sony X950G. Upstairs, I have the Samsung RU8000. It's still pretty good, but it doesn't hit as hard as this one does. And then upstairs again on the 3rd floor in my bedroom, I use the Auralic A50 paired with the ELAC debut reference B5.2s. Everything like above this floor, like the living room and bedroom, the speakers I use for those systems are just like whatever's extra, like in the review queue. Down here, I mainly use the Bucard S400s or whatever the hell I'm reviewing at the time. The 4th system is just going to be in my car. I don't plan on getting any more systems. I did at one point have a 5th system in my office, but I found that it's better to not do that because in my job, I like to hear what my staff is doing, what they're saying, and I couldn't do that while I was listening to music in my office. So let's see here. Next question. Matt Callus, pros and cons of a good tube preamp. I'm not sure. I can't use a tube preamp. My monoblocks are per Kinky Studio, should not be used with a tube preamp. However, the older guys at my local audio society seem to believe that if you're spending less than $2,000, a tube preamp will give you more of a 3D holographic sound stage and things like that than a solid state preamp would. Now, is that true, or is that like super old information that was maybe true 30 years ago and is outdated now and just being regurgitated by these guys that are like really old? Maybe, I don't know, you know what I mean? Any good correlation between driver material and the kind of sound you prefer? No, not really. I've listened to like paper, metal, you know, those are kind of like the 2 primary materials. It's either a paper woofer or an aluminum woofer at this point. I know PSB used like some composite glass. I think Focal does the same thing, but I think I kind of generally like everything. I think the material does matter, but I think the it's like when you're like a speaker overall, it's not just one component, just like our sound system isn't one component. It's all more like an orchestra, and it's all how the overall pieces play together with each other and those relationships and such. Matt's 3rd question is more displacement or turbocharging. Love this question. So you guys that subscribe know I'm a huge car guy. Definitely turbocharging all the way. In a turbocharged car, you're going to get more torque and generally more horsepower, and it's just going to be a better overall experience, all other things being equal. And I still prefer turbocharging a smaller engine over a naturally aspirated larger engine because it will still make more power, generally speaking, and I will prove it to you. Formula One around the 80s, they had a new rule change. They allowed one of 2 engine variations, either 1.5 liter turbocharged or 3 liters unturbocharged. Everyone used 1.5 liters turbocharged, and they were running something about 3 bar or about 45 or 47 pounds of boost, which is a ridiculous amount, and making around 1,500 horsepower in these 1.5 liter V6 engines made by like Honda or Peugeot. BMW actually did it with a 4-cylinder. Tons and tons and tons of power. To this day, I don't believe anyone has ever made that much horsepower out of a naturally aspirated 3-liter engine. So turbocharged all the way. Gary Fish, actually his full name, Gary Fish, hard die broke. That's a long name, buddy. Okay, his question, loved your live stream with Cheap Audio Man Randy. I think a more in-depth video on 2 speakers or even 2 systems would be sweet. I too have the Cora 806, awesome, great speaker. For me, it can't be beaten in the 1K range. Aside from the periodic listening fatigue, that can have to do with your connected equipment. On my system, I'm definitely getting like as much out of them as I can. And the room might be a factor as well. Maybe try adding some first reflection point room treatment. You know, that might help. Let's see. Okay, so basically he's asking, would it be better to have, you know, if you want 2 different flavors of sound, is it better to do it with 2 different speakers or 2 different amps? I like to do it with 2 different speakers because I think once you have a great set of amps, it's just something you don't have to think about again. And playing with different speakers just becomes like this really fun thing to do. Whereas if you're like constantly changing amps, well, I think you're going to change speakers too occasionally, and now you're just constantly changing everything all the time, and it's more of like an addiction at that point. So I don't recommend that. I recommend doing it with speakers. I feel like I missed a question. Let's see. First hi-fi setup answered, cord DAC answered, vinyl answered, power cables answered, Tidal versus Cubas answered, Kinky Studio stuff, total of sound system pros and cons of a preamp, tube preamp. Okay, no, I didn't miss anything. Next question, DF. Have you experienced with room treatment? If so, what has been your preferred material? He also goes on to talk about how he over-treated his room, he may feel like, and because when he took some of it down, he noticed an increase in like clarity in the system. That is a thing. You can over-treat your room and make the overall sound a little bit too dull. I don't know enough about room treatment to answer your question and tell you if I have a preferred material. And I'll be honest, I saw a guy on YouTube who took some measurements and he proved that just like shoving some towels on your walls was like pretty good too. So I don't know if the material is like that important, and I think it's more like how much of it there is, because he did about like this much thickness worth of towels, and the panels I have are just a little bit thicker than that. Anyhow, I digress. I use polyester panels on the wall you see behind me just because I think they look good, and they did dampen the room quite a bit. And then I use the GIK Acoustics Gobo panels on the first reflection points. I like those because I don't have to wall mount them, and they're finished on both sides, so they look really good even from behind. Filtered power strip, any difference for you? A better cable for your streaming, did it make any difference? What's the next possible DAC? And have you tried tubes before? That's all one question from Yannick 930. Filtered power strip, I use the one Sean talked about on Zero Fidelity, the W Audio one. It didn't seem to make any difference, and that was the whole point of it, that it doesn't make a difference. It just, you know, gives you more outlets without degrading the sound. A better cable for your streaming, did it make a difference? I only use the Ethernet cable, and I've never tried a different one. And then the RCA cables coming off it, I just use the Analysis Plus oval ones. What's the next possible DAC? The Shitmodius, which I have here, and I'm going to review it. Have you tried tubes before? No, per the reason previously, my monoblocks are not compatible with tubes. Matt Callus, longtime subscriber. Thank you for being here with us, my friend. Advantages of monoblocks. Basically better isolation, lower noise floor. That's kind of like the whole selling point. When you separate the chassis, you lower the noise floor. Generally speaking, though, monoblocks having more space in them, because they're now separate chassis, are going to be stuffed with much larger transformers, stronger output stages, and things like that. And generally speaking, they will usually have a lot more power as well. I think they're just steezy, and that's why I got them. Best practices for integrating a subwoofer. He asked this question before I posted that video. I think the question's been answered with the last week's video. Michael Metiak asks, how do these cables sound? Do you notice an appreciable difference? He's referring to the cables in the picture that I used for eye candy. I noticed a little bit more openness in the top end, actually. Chicken CEO, love your username, my friend. Is there a difference between stereo subwoofer versus, okay, I remember reading this previously. He's asking if there's a difference between like using stereo with a subwoofer versus using like an AVR and the LFE channel. He said when he used his LFE channel, he felt like he had more bass. So the 0.1 or the LFE output on an AVR, sometimes it's boosted, sometimes it's EQ'd, sometimes there's options and a whole like adjustment settings page for it. So there's definitely a good chance your 0.1 LFE output might seem to have more bass because they generally have some adjustments. However, believe it or not, the pre-outs to the subwoofer are the purest signal, but use whichever one you like, honestly. Pradeep asks, why some American audio products double the price in India, like SVS and REL? Because governments suck. No, I'm just kidding. Just so you know, it's the same here in the US. We pay quite a bit more for brands like Focal and Monitor Audio that are made in Europe. For example, the Focal Cora 806 are $990 here in the United States. I believe with the current exchange rate, they're closer to $700 in Europe. Monitor Audio Bronze 100s are $600 here in the United States, and I believe they're about $400 in Europe. But to answer your question, generally, it's going to come down to the cost to get it overseas, freight, everything that comes with that, insuring it, etc. And then all the different various taxes involved, many of them you might not even know about. But yeah, basically taxes and shipping, unfortunately. Robert M asks, Bucard S400s, they get a lot of rave reviews, but I wasn't that crazy about them. I admit they are very cohesive, but I found their highs to be slightly rolled off. True. And they overall did not sound that musical. Their bass was great. What's your impression now that you've had other speakers in your system? I still love them. They're my daily driver. I'm a huge fan of them. I don't consider them to be rolled off. I just consider them to be on the darker side of neutral. They still have tons of detail and clarity, at least with my Kinky stack when I use them with that. And I do have very sensitive hearing. I can hear up to about 18.5 kilohertz, and I don't listen too loud. With the Kinky stack and Bucard S400s, it does seem like a match made in heaven. I can see a lot of people finding them to be just a little bit too dark for their taste, however. So, you know, at the end of the day, this whole thing's personal. If you don't like them, there's totally nothing wrong with that. What Hi-Fi said the Revel M16 was the best speaker of 2018 under $1,000, and I didn't like it. You know what I mean? So different strokes for different folks, but personally, I still love them. Next one, Iowa Audio Review. He hit us with 10 questions. Thank you for your contribution. Let's get through this. Do measurements matter when it comes to marketing? I don't know what you mean by that. If you're asking if measurements matter in general, they matter for the guy designing the speaker. Measurements are a tool used in designing speakers. They could be a tool used for other things as well. They're not the end-all be-all, however. Second question, is selling a piece of gear based on no real science but advertised as such fraud? I mean, yeah. If you're like, if I make my own subwoofer and I do zero measurements for its frequency response and I just tell you, yeah, it extends down to 20 hertz, but I never actually measured it and I have no actual idea if it does do that or not, yeah, I'd call that fraud for sure, yeah. Let's see here. Do you use an EQ to tailor the sound of the speaker or amp to your liking? I do not. I don't have an EQ in my system. I have in the past, but this system I currently have doesn't have one. Budget gear like DACs and amps getting cheaper and better. How much will this affect expensive gear that performs the same and just looks nicer? I don't think expensive gear performs the same as cheaper gear and just looks nicer unless the more expensive gear is like very old, right? So like we do have to consider that for like modern to modern gear, like if two DACs came out today, one was $1,000 and one was like $5,000, I don't think the $5,000 one would simply just be in a better chassis. I think a lot of these situations we're seeing where these like lower priced items are beating out or besting more expensive items has to do with the fact that these more expensive items are at the end of their life cycle and in fact overdue for an upgrade. Some of these like, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 DACs people are saying are not as good as their $1,000 counterparts, are up to 10 years old in their initial design, so do keep that in mind. Have you ever built your own speakers or a DIY kit? No, I suck at woodworking. I wish it's a skill I had. I don't. Do you prefer soft dome or metal dome or horns? I prefer soft dome, but some metal dome speakers sound amazing, like the PSB Imagine Mini. Will you have an interest in the Spotify Hi-Fi? No. I don't want to have to, you know, update my playlist and re-download all my music. You have the house to yourself. What's the first song you crank up? I always have the house to myself. I'm a bachelor and I have a 3-bedroom home. One room is here. This is the listening room. One room is my bedroom. Another room is the gym that I have on the 3rd floor that I made. And then obviously the living room and such. But if I just want to crank a song for no reason at all, I'd probably pick Keep It Mellow by Marshmello and Omar Lynx. Love that song. Question number 9, if you could only have a subwoofer for one audio source, movies or music, which would you pick? Music. And which sub? REL Carbon Special, because it's beautiful. 10, what do you think the best audio product to come out in 2020 was? I'm not sure because I don't know like what came out when. Honestly, I don't keep track of that. The best product I reviewed, you know, in my opinion for 2020 was the Rhythmic L12 subwoofer. $570 for that level of performance I just thought was amazing. What do you think will be the best product for 2021? I'm not sure. You know, some small subwoofers have been coming out lately. SVS just announced the that micro subwoofer 2 days ago. You know, Kev has that KC62 coming. Maybe we'll see some like new small subwoofers, but I don't know what'll be like the best. Yama fanboy, longtime subscriber. Thank you, brother. His question, honestly, and also with significant embarrassment, I still don't understand the importance of balanced XLR. Why they're so hyped and as being beneficial. So balanced XLR, I don't know if it was originally designed for microphone use, but it is predominantly used in long run microphone use. So where the cables are like very long, because essentially with a balanced cable, you're gonna have a better noise rejection and better shielding essentially in a way. So it's just less likely any kind of stray signals from like cellular or anything are gonna enter that cable signal path and distort the sound, which, you know, for a microphone, it's very, very important. Additionally, XLR can carry some phantom power for certain microphones, but that's a whole nother story. For my use, where I'm just using like 1/2 meter cables, I don't think I need XLR. I've tried it. I couldn't notice any difference, honestly. Your next question, Yama, is you're saying you kind of understand impedance, but not really. Impedance is super simple. It's a measure of resistance, and we measure it in ohms. I like to think about it like in this childish way of like the amplifier is trying to crank out power, right? And the ohms is like the limiter for that. So your amplifier is just like, I've got a ton of power to crank out and I'll crank it out until I explode. But then the speaker cable hits the speakers at 8 ohms and the speaker's like, nah, fam, we got 8 ohms of resistance. You cannot crank out all the power you want until you explode. And the amp's like, fine, 8 ohms it is. And it gets whatever the amp can do at 8 ohms. Let's say it's 100 watts. You connect a 4 ohm speaker to that amplifier. The amplifier's like, yay, I can crank out more power because there's less resistance. And you know, if it's a great amp, maybe it'll double in power to 200 watts. Now, the amp is flowing more power, it will run hotter. Say we do the same thing and go to like a 2 ohm speaker. The amp's gonna be like, yay, I can flow even harder and like force more power out, because that's what it wants to do. At that point, it'll probably blow up. You know what I mean? Because it's just flowing too much. That's the way I look at it in my head. It might sound childish, and it's not wrong though. It is very layman's, but it is what it is. Irene Sorios just made a joke about electrons flowing in cables. I appreciate you. And the last question, F. Polenko. What is the most fun small cheap speaker you've ever auditioned, like a Miata, but with audio? PSB Imagine Mini all the way. Little 4-inch woofer. I think a 1-inch or 3/4 inch titanium tweeter. But the sound is amazing. In a small room with good components, this tiny speaker is going to give you like good articulate bass with a strong leading edge. The mid-range is very good, with good textures, and the top end is just, it's one of those things that is just so good and so fun and sounds so amazing. Selling that speaker is one of my biggest regrets in my audio journey. In fact, about once a month, I scour eBay looking for a used set. So that is all 25 questions, guys. For everyone who participated in this and asked a question in the community section, thank you. It means the world to me. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I'll probably do another one in the future, maybe in a couple of months. Until next time, later.